Alright, so today we're going to talk about the theory of footwork and movement. And where we're going to start today is going to be sort of in stance theory, and then move into footwork, movement, how movement is designed to give you angles on your opponent, how you generate power, and what happens when you move. There's a lot of things that happen when you move, and so that's why it's really important to talk about it and then show you guys some basic drills that really define why both movement is important for yourself while you're fighting, but also to recognize when your opponent moves, what they give up and what they gain. So the first thing that we're going to start off with is sort of our stance, because you can't move around, you can't do anything unless you're really in a balanced stance to do so. We want to be able to move both forward and back, as well as be able to laterally move just as easily in our combat game, because unlike things like fencing, where you're fighting in a singular line, everybody has the capability to move laterally and around one another at all times. So, basic stance, some real, very basic theories are, if you're standing with your feet together, this is the most extreme of having where your feet can be placed, right? If I'm standing with my feet together, this gives me, I'm really tall, right? And one of the other things it gives me as an advantage is I can move from place to place very easily, and I can lunge very easily, right? If I want to move forward, I can take really long steps from having my feet put together, right? Or if I want to move side to side, I can move my feet side to side, really long steps, right? I can leap from these positions, right? But to that extreme, it takes away a lot of things. What sort of things does having your feet together take away from you? Balance is a big one, right? If I'm standing like this, it's really easy for me to be pushed around, or if my body is not directly in line with my spine, I'm straight up and down, if I lean one way or the other, it's really easy for me to fall over. It's hard for me to... What's that?
You can't generate force.
It's a little bit harder to generate force. It's harder to use my hips, right? Absolutely. These are a lot of things that this takes away from me, but understanding this sort of extreme is very important, because the further you get from one way to another, which the opposite would be if I was in like a horse stance, right? If I was real deep into a stance with my feet far apart, right? My balance from side to side is really strong, right? I can move left and right, I can lean left and right without losing a lot of balance. If I'm fighting my opponent like, in a big horse stance, right? I can move forward and back really easily. But to that extent, I lose that capability of just movement, right? I can't really move myself around if I want to move towards my opponent. This doesn't really work out in combat, right? Even if I want to laterally move this way, it's really difficult for me to do that. It takes a lot of energy, and I can't get very far. So it's inefficient. So that's the second extreme. So a really nice balanced stance happens to be somewhere in between those two. But we want the efficiency of a nice balanced stance, not be able to be pushed around, someone just touch you and you fall over. Be able to just lean a little bit and use our upper body, generate force with our hips. But we also want that advantage of being able to move and lunge and get from place to place very quickly. Move around the battlefield. Fresh meat. Any questions on that so far? Makes pretty good sense, right? One of the other things I want to talk about, and that comes along with those two extremes, is we all only have 2 feet and 2 legs. So physically, we can only be planted in two spots on the ground at any given time, which means because we don't have sort of like a triangular structure or quadruped structure, there's always two spots or two directions in which we're really strong against, and 2 spots or directions we're very weak against. If I get a partner real quick, anybody? Stand any way you like. Okay. So 2 spots where he's very strong against is these directions, right? If I push him in this direction, he can resist me very easily. Right? If I pull him in this direction, he can kind of resist me pretty easily. But opposing to that, if I push him in this direction, he immediately has to move his feet to compensate. Same idea if I pull him in this direction. He has to move his feet in order to compensate for that. So recognizing where your own feet are and recognizing where your weaknesses are and how you have to move to compensate are very important. And vice versa for your opponent. If I have an opponent, I can use that weakness to my advantage. I can force him to either compensate by moving his feet, or he'll just fall over because I'm pushing against his weakness. He may lean back in order to compensate. He might do a lot of very bad things, and I can take really quick and full advantage of that. That's some quick stance theory. Thank you very much.
2 classes in 1.
Well, I wanted to go over a little bit of stance, because if you can't stand right, you can't move right? So what we're going to do here is we're going to sort of go over, from the ground up, some basic rules that I like to give people. These aren't hard, these are sort of like some guidelines for you. This isn't to say that they're perfect. Everybody's body type is different, so the way that you stand is going to be different from the way that I stand and be comfortable, from the way that he stands and is comfortable in fighting. And there's a lot of combat situations where you might break or bend some of these rules, but understanding the rules and when you can and should break them is very important. Okay? So, just basic stance. One of the first rules is that your feet should be roughly shoulder width apart when you're standing. You shouldn't walk on a tightrope. You shouldn't be on a balance beam. You should have your feet at least shoulder width apart. Alright? Secondly, your heels from your opponent. So say these cinder blocks is my opponent. I shouldn't have my heels in line with my opponent. What do I mean by that is, this heel is here, and there's a straight line from my opponent to this heel. I should not have a second heel in line with this opponent, right? So my feet are shoulder width apart, but my heels are in line with my opponent. Everybody see that? Understand that? This is very important for lateral movement. It makes it difficult for you to adjust to your opponent and move laterally as needed if your feet are like this. The second thing is your forward foot should have your toes facing your opponent. So if I was fighting, again, against these cinder blocks, trying to get to a position where you guys can see my feet, my toes should be facing the cinder blocks here. I shouldn't have my toes faced out this way towards the field, and I shouldn't have my toes faced out this way towards thrash, right? And this is very important because as I bend my knee, I want my knee to bend towards my opponent to adjust levels, right, and move. If I have my toes pointed out this direction, when I bend my knee, I end up turning this direction. Or if I'm this way, I end up turning this direction, which becomes really awkward. And it becomes a very serious safety issue because now if I go to bend my knee really quick and I'm facing out this way and something comes at me from this direction, I can put pressure on my knee. So those are kind of 3 relatively good rules to follow when you're deciding where to place your feet in relation to yourself and your opponent. Any questions on feet? Cool. Moving up, knees, really quick and simple. Bend your knees to change your level. That's what your knees are there for. If I want to go from high to low, I want to attack somebody more in the hips rather than the shoulders, I just bend my knees, right? Very simple. Your waist, try and keep your upper body above your hips and your feet. Don't lean too far into your weak spots. So like I said, we have our weak points, these directions. Don't lean these directions. It becomes very difficult for you to maneuver once you do that. And finally, your hips and your shoulders, right? So your hips and shoulders kind of move in tandem with one another, left and right. A lot of times when you move your shoulders one way or the other, your hips follow, and vice versa. If you move your hips one way, your shoulders follow. So if I move my hips to the left, my shoulders will follow. And you'll notice this a lot in movement. So as you're taking steps, your hips are going to be moving. They're going to be generating power as you move. And you can use that power to strike somebody. Cool? Alright. Any questions on anything about stance? That's pretty much my review on stance.
Just real quick, that you're saying don't lean over those weak directions, but then you do lean over the strong directions.
So you can lean over your strong points.
You're going down for a hip scoop.
Yeah, so you'll see a lot of people when they do something like a hip scoop, they'll bend their knees, and you'll see, like, this is leaning over my forward foot.
Strong direction.
If I tried to do that and I had my left foot forward, I'd fall over. Alright, so the next thing we're going to start working on is movement, the theory of movement, how you move. First we're going to start with ourselves, personal movement, and then we'll work on how to move in relation to your opponent. The first thing is very simple type of movement, something you do every day, is full step movement, right? It's taking one foot and putting it in front of the other. Seems really simple, right? Well, it becomes a lot more complicated when you start putting it into combat and you're swinging swords up top, then you're trying to move your feet at the bottom. It becomes really interesting, and you'll find that it changes a lot of the way combat moves based on how you move your feet, whether you're putting one foot in front of the other like so, or whether you're using what I call a step and drag method, which is the other method, which allows you to keep your stance moving the forward foot and then dragging your back foot along with it. So you're moving your lead foot forward, your back foot follows. Alright? So those two types of movements, quickly assessing their strengths and weaknesses. What do you think is a benefit or a strength to taking full steps, one foot in front of the other? Quick movement, right?
Cover more distance.
You can cover more distance over a period of time. That's why we run that way, right? We don't hop skip. They don't skip. Anything else?
Oh, it changes your, you change how defensive you are, right? With the sword board, if you're taking a full step forward, now your sword foot forward is more aggressive.
It changes your stance, right? It changes sword foot forward versus shield foot forward.
Which side you can move towards.
Right. It changes. So, in reality, it changes everything.
Yeah.
Right.
Allows you to pull stuff out of the way. You know, they're swinging on this side, you step back with that foot.
It takes everything that was forward and now puts it back, and vice versa. That's very important to recognize, right? So, with all that, what are some pros to being able to do the step and drag method, keeping the forward foot moving forward and the back foot backside?
Safer. Like you can
Maintain your stance.
You keep your stance, and it's a little bit safer in mid combat, right? It's harder to get caught flat-footed.
Yeah, it's easier to change your direction if somebody's kind of approaching you, because you're taking a full step forward, your foot's off the ground, you can't really redirect, but if you kind of shuffle step, you're able to redirect.
I can redirect to a different spot real quickly. Yep. Anything else? Pretty much covers it.
You keep your lines the same. So when you switch, you're rotating what your strong side and your weak side.
Yep. You're keeping your same stance, right? None of that changes. Your forward side stays forward, and your back side stays back. All right. So, based on all this, we're going to do some kind of quick theory drills. Come on out here, everybody. you make a step, you generate power. When your foot touches the ground, you're generating power. Whether you choose to use that for your stick or for something else is up to you. If I'm fighting an opponent and I take a step towards him, that right there is generating power that could be thrown into my step. Same thing, if I take a different type of step, if I take a step like this, it's generating power as soon as my foot touches the ground. So you notice a lot of fighters, they're using that power to their advantage. As they're moving forward, they're trying to make contact with their opponent or their gear at the same time that their foot is hitting the ground. Right? If I'm going to come in, I don't plant and then throw, right? I want to plant and throw at the same time. I want to use that power. Also, your hips are generating power as you move forward and back. So if I'm taking a step, that motion of me not only stepping with my foot, but also the hip rotation from me moving is generating power. To use that to your advantage, try and time your strikes so that when you're planting, you're hitting, don't have to always time your strikes when you're planting your foot. But if you're trying to throw strikes while like you're moving mid-move, and then move, you're gonna have a lot of trouble. Make sense? Any questions on that? Little tip for movement. Try and time strikes that are based on your hip movement. So if I take a step this direction, I'm more likely to throw a shot that comes from this direction because that's where my power is going. I'm less likely to throw a shot this direction because I have to bring my hip back to throw. I'm not saying you can't do it, I'm saying it's less likely. Good? Sweet. Alright. No questions at all. You guys got it. Finally, the last thing about movement and striking is when a person is moving, the angles are always changing. That means that let's say that me and him are fighting, and I'm moving this way, and he's following me around, right? I'm always getting a new angle, and he's forced to turn around and follow me. Now, what if he laterally moves with me instead? Now, instead of me circling him, he follows me around, right? There are different angles being generated, and he's trying to compensate for it. He's always following me around. I can use both of those things to my advantage, right? He's always trying to position himself to follow me around. So if I move over here, I can get inside angles, I can get outside angles. Those angles are based on the direction that you move, so they're usually on the opposite side of the movement. So if he's moving to his right, my left, the angles that are being opened are generally going to be on this side, and vice versa. So if he's moving to his left, my right, it's probably going to be much easier for me to strike on his sword side or his right side. So recognize that movement from both yourself and your opponent. Make sense? You think so? Sure? He's like, oh yeah, sure. People move, I throw a strike. Yeah. Yeah, winning games. Sweet. Alright. Yeah. So, it doesn't matter whether you're at a range or close to your opponent, except that it's a little more exponential the closer you get to your opponent. Right? The further I am away, the harder it is for me to really take advantage of those angles when we both move, right? But if I'm even couple inches closer to my opponent, it makes it a lot easier to take advantage of those angles. So what's something we can do to both get closer to our opponent and move laterally?
45-degree step.
Step at a 45-degree angle, right? Pretty, right? Instead of stepping just left and right, or forward and back, let's do both at the same time, right? Make sense? In response, what's the quickest way to get away from somebody?
Straight back.
What's that?
Straight back.
Anybody else? Lateral back. Which direction?
If you're moving this way, I'm gonna want to move this.
Right. Because where's my sword? My sword's coming this way, right? My sword's on the right side of my body. So in order to get to him, it has to come from the right side of my body that way. So when you're trying to escape your opponent, it's important that you try and move laterally and not forward and back. The second reason for trying to escape your opponent, or when you're trying to escape your opponent from moving laterally, is it forces them to change direction. Okay? If we're playing this game where I'm chasing him, right, and he's trying to move back away from me in a line, I can run forward faster than he can run backwards, relatively speaking. There's some anomalies out there. I've seen some people run backwards real quick. But if he moves laterally when I go to step forward, I now have to change my direction in order to follow him around. And that might include, like, instead of step and drag, change my stance and keep it going, right? So this movement becomes very important in both trying to get strikes on your opponent and defending yourself. Right, so we're going to kind of go over that a little bit. We're going to do a drill called circle strike. Anybody done this drill yet? Yeah, Thrash knows how to do this drill. So the way this drill works is you're going to have a defender and an attacker. I'll be the attacker. The defender is going to be, imagine he's in the middle of a circle. So there's a circle all the way around him. Goes all the way around and comes back around. Okay. As the attacker, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lunge in and strike. I can lunge in any direction that I want. I can lunge in straight on, so I can lunge in and strike. He's going to stay put in the middle of the circle, so you're not allowed to move from your position. I didn't tell you that. So you're in the middle of this circle. You're not allowed to move from your position. I'm on the outside of the circle, and that circle is roughly 1 step's distance away from you. I'm going to take a step in. I'm going to move. I can move straight in, so I can here, and then from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move laterally out of his range as he strikes back. So he's going to strike back at me, but most importantly, I want to end up roughly 30 degrees on this circle to the next position. And then from here, I'm going to step in and step back out on that circle. Alternatively, I could step in at an angle and then step back out straight on the circle. And we're going to do this all the way around.
Am I allowed to step, like, half step back, or just stay put?
Try and keep like 1 foot planted, so keep your sword
Okay.
foot planted, and you can move your other foot around and just turn to face your opponent. Any questions on that? So what we're going to do is, what's that?
The direction you move away is like the primary, secondary, tertiary attack. The direction you move away is supposed to help eliminate the tertiary normally, isn't it?
It's supposed to eliminate his response, right? So you notice that I came in and I struck, right? And as he responded, I'm moving out of his range. So the idea here is I want to get into his range, and I want to lessen his response towards me by getting out of it immediately. Make sense? The attacker will do 1 circle, and then you'll switch places, and then the new attacker will do a whole circle. Okay? And lunge closer to one another. Just because it's really difficult to hit people when they have a board, so you need to get closer. Good? Sweet. Alright, so the next drill we're going to do, since you guys love doing drills right now, we're going to do essentially 3-step, but a little bit slower. We're going to try and identify lateral movement, important lateral movement for 3-step. Who has done 3-step? That's probably the same people, right? Okay. So 3-step, if I get you over here. We're going to start out in roughly like block strike range. If I'm the attacker, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a step towards him, and I'm going to throw a strike, and he's going to defend against it. And I'm going to do that 3 times in a row. Okay?
Block, 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 it's backstep.
Yep, so he's going to follow my movement, and he's going to block my attacks. And once we're done, once I've made 3 strikes and he made 3 blocks, he's going to return the favor. He's now become the attacker, and he's going to return back on me 3 times. So slowly it looks like this. So I'm like 1, 2, 3, and then he becomes the attacker. 1, 2, 3, right? And then I'm the attacker now. 1, 2, 3, and then he becomes the attacker. Alright,
So just that?
that's all 3-step is. Start off slow so you guys can kind of get the hang of it first. Try and incorporate lateral movement into your 3-step, and take that part kind of slow. Try not to stay on a line, but also get enough room to move. No, this is just, imagine block strike with moving and throwing more times. Cool. So, we're going to take a short break in not doing drills immediately, but what we're going to do is sort of show you how angles work with boards. Boards are fun. So if you're trying to attack an opponent who has a board, why would you move laterally? And which direction? And kind of what are you going for? Like, let's do a little bit of critical thinking. What are some things you would look for when you're moving laterally and trying to hit an opponent with a board?
If they're left or right-handed.
Okay, dude. Come on over here. Right. So, is everybody right-handed here?
No.
I'm a lefty.
We got a lefty, sweet. All right. So if we're matched off, and we just go forward and back, right? It's really hard to get past a board, right? You see, when boardmen fight, you always see them moving laterally around. They're trying to get a better angle on their opponent, trying to get underneath of their board, they're trying to get up the top of their board, trying to find weird angles to get around them. Boards are really good at blocking, right? So, don't move for a second. So let's think about this a little critically, right? If we're fighting and I move at a 45-degree angle towards his sword side, because we're not worried about moving forward anymore. If I move 45 degrees towards his sword side, right? What happens to all of my angles? I really get what? I get really great angles to them, right?
You get horrible angles on the outside and wonderful on the inside.
Right? This shield's in the way if I come this way, and I get really good angles over here. Right? I get a sweet stab too. If I move 45 degrees this way, the opposite effect happens, right? The shield's in the way over here, but I get a sweet butt scoop, and I can also go around to the backside.
And his sword's way away from you.
And his sword is way away. That's it. That's the third point that's very important, is that when you're retreating from somebody who has a board, you can retreat to their board side and not have to worry about their sword anymore. Right? So what does that do for me defensively, going both sides? Right? If I go 45 degrees this way, defensively, what does that do for me?
It moves everything on your board side out of reach. He can't wrap that side.
How about on my other side?
Not terrible.
So in moving to that position, I don't give up a whole lot, right? Unlike the person that's standing still, which isn't going to happen the whole time, but unlike the person standing still, I'm gaining a bunch of advantages, and I'm not giving up a whole lot, right? Because my board is still kind of facing him, and vice versa. If I'm over here, I gain a ton of defensive advantages. The defensive advantage being that he has to go through his own board to try and hit me, on top of my board still being here. When you're moving like that, it kind of doesn't seem like it. Like if I move this way, he's just going to turn to face me, right? But in combat's done in microseconds, little tiny pockets of time, so that I may move into this position and I might get a strike off. So if I strike as soon as my foot lands, and then he turns to face me, it doesn't matter anymore. I've already hit him. Right? So those tiny little pockets of time are what we're really aiming for in a lot of this footwork. Make sense? Right? And if I can put myself in that position before he realizes it, or maybe I push him into it, or I fake him into a position, so I might come forward and then move out. Right? He's expecting me to come forward at him, and then suddenly I'm off to his side. That changes the game a lot, and I get that small microsecond, and I can plan on that because I'm the aggressor. I can plan on where I'm going to be in that new pocket of time. Ready, left. Make sense? So what we want to do with this next drill is identify the weaknesses of our opponent as we laterally move in that new pocket of time without allowing us to take this exercise time to see where those weaknesses are. So what we're going to do is we're going to do just that. We're going to have an attacker and defender. The attacker is going to step off to 45 degrees, play with this a little bit. You can go left or right. Right? And just have the defender just kind of hang out and say, okay, this is where you can identify the weak spots here. You can identify the weak spots here. Identify the weak spots here. And then switch roles. A lot of your guys' gear is a little bit different from one another, so you'll notice that based on gear, you'll see different results. Punch shields are a little bit different. The way he holds his shield is a little bit different. You see how he holds it like up and angled a lot. So, a quick lateral move over here for a shoulder shot won't work out as well on him, even if I try and get this advantage. But something like a hip scoop would be much more beneficial to me, whereas somebody else is definitely going to get hit by that shoulder shot. So let's do a quick intro sword and board drill for lateral move. About 10 minutes left for discussion, or anything you guys want to go over. If there's something that maybe you wanted to be a part of this class, or if you guys have any questions.
It doesn't matter what I do because I'm sure that I'm going to find out.
I'd like to know a bit more about how you manipulate your opponent into.
So that's just why I'm close to my boss.
Great.
So the first thing you want to do is identify their weak areas, right? So I know that in this stance, when I approach you, that if I want you to switch stance specifically, I need to get you moving in this direction or this direction. So in identifying that, I can push or pull you. If I want to push you, what I want to do is I want to get into this space over here. And then I want to either manipulate your gear in one way or another, or make you uncomfortable to the point that you want to move back.
don't get me wrong.
that might require me to get much closer to you, so I might have to do something like this.
I've seen kids projecting shit like this, and I can't
So I
even
can
close them.
come in here like this. I do,
I can't even really.
they're really a shot that I've been doing a lot recently,
They've been fighting
where
for me, but still, I understand
you
why.
can come in here like this, come in here, and then throw in between their head and sword.
I feel like
You can also pull your opponent, which is a little more difficult if they're not very aggressive, or they're really defensive and they don't want to come towards you. What you can do is you can come in here and you can do this. You notice that in order to step this direction, you had to switch stance. And then I can take advantage of that. So I can get you stepping this way, and then I can come back in.
Yeah, so I come in like this, and then I'm moving back this way.
You want to make sure so that you're attacking my strong angle.
Right.
So if you did that, I could just move
Okay.
and not change my stance.
Right.
You want to step.
Oh, I wanna move
You want to
this
step over here.
Yeah, so I step in like this.
Right. So now, in order for me to chase you anywhere, if I want to strike at you,
Yeah.
I have to move this foot.
Right. Interesting.
Because if I do this, then you just hit me in the shoulder.
Right. And yeah, if you move that way, your foot's off the ground a lot. Right?
Yeah, and
Over here.
I have an awkward position where it's real difficult for me to strike at you, right? I have to do weird stuff, and I have to take another step in order to reposition.
I see.
So just from a natural point of view, like in combat, when people aren't gonna be like, okay, well, I need to move my foot over here, and then I do this weird dance in order to get repositioned. They're just gonna go to the most comfortable position they have, which is just step that direction.
Right, right. Okay.
So that's the kind of push and pull method you can use.
For Florentine fighters, either for or against, would it just be variations on the circle drill effectively?
Yeah, so you can use that circle drill for sword and board. You can use it for Florentine, to go different directions. So a lot of times with Florentine, your toe pointed towards your opponent. With Florentine, I give it sort of a little bit of an exception in that you don't have to point your toe directly towards your opponent's center line. You can point it towards your target area. So if you're, as a Florentine, a lot of times you want to isolate an area. So you want to isolate their weapon arm. So when you're fighting, you can kind of step over here and point your toes towards my weapon arm rather than my center line, which gives you an easier time isolating my weapon. Okay. Because that's the direction we're going to go. We talked about, the reason that we point our toes towards our opponent's center line is because that's the direction we want our knee to bend to. It's easier for you to manipulate my arm and isolate my sword.
And against flow fighters?
In which case, for lateral movement,
Yeah.
so you want to identify, again, you want to isolate both of their swords on the same side of their body. So if you put up your guard in any fashion, so from here, what I would probably identify is I want to move in this direction and isolate both of your swords to this side of my body. So I could throw here and isolate it so that I have an easier time dealing with both of your swords at the same time. Does that make sense? Vice versa, and because your swords are kind of both in the same plane towards me, I could easily isolate it this way and still fight you. So that sword has a really far distance to come towards me and fight me, and then this one is the one I'm really worried about.
So against flow fighters, never engage straight on, try and angles?
Yeah. I mean, in reality, we're always trying to get better angles on our opponent in any weapon combination. But I think for against flow and for flow, it's even more important. Because you have to be very careful. As a flow fighter, you have to be very careful not to let your weapons both get isolated on one side of their body. And against a flow fighter, you're always trying to do that. It's really difficult for me to fight a flow fighter like this, right? I have to worry about both sorts on two sides of my body. Any other questions? Awesome class, guys. Glad it wasn't 20 people, actually.
Yeah, don't have much space.
Looks like there's ditch, and I think dinner's at 6.